A murderous mentality is festering and growing in Israel, and if it takes control, Israel will do a genocide. And you have people who fixate so much on fighting terrorism that they lose sight of their humanity. And so if that mentality, if that murderous mentality just festers and continues to grow, what's going to come about from that? A policy or a desire to enact a policy of genocide. The Armenian genocide did not begin with genocide. The Armenian genocide began with mass deportations. So when they talk about mass deportations, right, if they start saying, well, we're going to do mass deportations of Palestinians, we're not going to kill them. We're just going to deport them. Oh, yes, yes, yes. And the Germans said, oh, we're going to deport Jews to Poland. Well, no, there's no official order to kill them, but we're just going to deport them to work camps in Poland. If we are to learn from history, and the sad reality is that people, for the most part, refuse to learn from history, but if we are indeed going to learn from history, then we should not be looking at such an idea with enthusiasm. All right, everyone. So I want to take the time to respond to a comment that was addressed to my video on the inevitability of a genocide of the Palestinian people by Jewish-Israeli fanatics. And what I said in my video, to which this person wrote his comment, was that there is a growing nationalism in Israel that is murderous, and there are people in Israel who do want to genocide the Palestinians, and this desire is growing. And I brought up a biblical value, a biblical lesson on this sort of mentality and how God hates it. And I brought up the story of King Saul doing a genocide on the Gibeonite Canaanite people who lived in ancient Israel. And this is a story that is recounted in the second book of Samuel, in which it is said that King Saul tried to exterminate the Gibeonites, who were a Canaanite people. And the Canaanites were amongst the greatest enemies of Israel. And the Bible says that King Saul tried to exterminate the Gibeonites in his zeal for Israel. In his zeal for Israel and Judah, King Saul tried to exterminate the Gibeonites. And while King David reigned over Israel, there was a great famine in the land. And this famine lasted for 3 years. And during this famine, King David went to God and he said, God, why is there this famine? And God told David, it is because of King Saul and his bloody house, for what he did to the Gibeonites, and how in his zeal for Israel and Judah, he tried to exterminate the Gibeonites. And so because of the bloodshed that King Saul did, because of King Saul's genocidal policy, I have cursed all of Israel with a famine. And so I took this story from the Bible and I said, this is a lesson to be learned, that God hates genocide. And so if the very, very religious and the very nationalistic Jews in Israel want to do a genocide, they should know that in the Bible, it makes it very, very clear that God hates genocide. And so this person, he calls himself RGTE6JF. This is like Star Wars level stuff here, right? It's like RDD2 or something like that. Very interesting username. But RG, I'll just call him RG. RG wrote quite a long comment as a response to my video. And so instead of me just writing a very short response, just writing a short reply, I decided, well, this person took the time to write out a long comment, and apparently this person really thought about it. So I decided, you know what, I'm going to do a video response to this comment. So here I go. It's a long comment, so I'm not going to read the whole thing from beginning to end. I'm just going to read just the comment in parts, and then I'm going to respond to each part that I read. So RG says, I get your point, Ted, but you can't really compare the Gibeonites with the Palestinians because the Palestinians have not asked for mercy. So what's my response to this one? The Gibeonites were living in ancient Israel, and they were a Canaanite people. Now, the Canaanites were supposed to be all exterminated. God told the Hebrews, when you go into Canaan, wipe the Canaanites out. Exterminate them. This was the commandment. But when Joshua was invading Canaan, the Gibeonites came to Joshua and they said, have mercy on us. We don't want to be exterminated. Now Joshua, he could have said, nope, God told me to exterminate every single one of you, and God even said that I should not have pity on the Canaanites, so it doesn't matter if you want mercy for me. I'm going to exterminate you. I'm going to slaughter all of you. And Joshua could have said that. But Joshua had mercy on the Gibeonites. Why is this? Now, this is so profound. So profound. This is why I wanted to do this video as a response to this comment, because there's a lot to talk about here, and there's a lot of profound things to discuss just from this story about the Gibeonites. God tells the Hebrews to exterminate all the Canaanites, and so the Gibeonites, a Canaanite people, they go to Joshua and they ask for mercy. And Joshua gives them mercy. And as I said, Joshua could have told them, nope, God told me to exterminate every single one of you Canaanite barbarians, and God told me not to have pity on any one of you savages, but he didn't. Joshua did not say that. He had mercy. And it's very profound that even when God tells a people to exterminate another people, there is still room for mercy. And even when God himself tells the Israelites to exterminate the Canaanites, that God still demands mercy in the midst of that. That God still demands mercy in the midst of such an order. There is still room for mercy. And so this was really, really the core of my video. That there is the letter of the law, but there is the spirit of the law. Letter of the law versus spirit of the law. The letter of the law would have been Joshua saying to the Gibeonites, nope, nope, nope. The law says that you are to be exterminated. That's the letter of the law. But even after God himself tells the Israelites to exterminate a people, God still demands mercy. And when mercy is given, God honors it, because God is a God of mercy. And so Joshua says, I will give you mercy. That's the spirit of the law. And what does Christ say about the spirit of the law? The spirit of the law is justice and mercy. Why did God want the Canaanites to be vanquished? Because the Canaanites were unjust. They were unjust. They put their babies through the fire of Baal Molech. They were cannibals. They did systematic cannibalism, systematic human sacrifice. They were barbaric. They were savage. They followed a demonic religion. They were like the Aztecs. The Spanish invaded the New World. The Spanish invaded Mexico, and they saw the barbarism of the Aztec Empire, and the Spanish witnessed the Aztecs committing human sacrifice by the thousands. And it was so immense, the savagery of the Aztecs, that in any given day, the Aztec Empire would sacrifice literally thousands of people in one day. But even facing that evil, the Spanish would still show mercy, because the Spanish also spread Christianity in those lands and to those people. And even if you read about the conquest of Mexico by Hernan Cortez would go to the Aztecs and tell them to reject their idolatry and follow Christ. There is still room for mercy, even facing the most savage of empires, there is still room for mercy. And so that's the spirit of the law. Now, the spirit of the law also entails justice. So the Canaanites were unjust, right? They did horrendously unjust things, and that is why God wanted them to be defeated and vanquished. But God also wants mercy. And when the Canaanites asked for mercy, God granted it to them. Rahab. Now you could say, well, the Gibeonites are a tribe, and when Joshua conquered Canaan, they were individuals that were being killed, but they were individuals who were given mercy at the same time. It wasn't just collective mercy or collectively given mercy. There was also mercy given at the individual level. When Rahab came to the Hebrews and assisted the two Hebrew spies, and what did she tell the two Hebrew spies? She said, "We have heard about the miracles of your God. We heard about how your God split the Red Sea during the Exodus." And so God showed mercy to Rahab, and the Hebrews showed mercy to Rahab. And when the Hebrews invaded Jericho, which was the city that Rahab was in, the Hebrews did not kill Rahab nor her family. Now they could have said, "Nope, God commanded us to slaughter all of you people, all of you Canaanites." That's the letter of the law. And that's having such a fanatical fixation on the letter of the law that you make yourself vacuous and absent of any humanity, any compassion, any mercy. And so what happens? The Hebrews follow the spirit of the law. And it goes further than that. RG is making the argument that the Gibeonites asked for mercy, the Palestinians have not asked for mercy. But my point was not that the situation of the Gibeonites was exactly the same as that of the Palestinians today. That was not my point. My point was, my main theme that I was really trying to drive in, that I was really trying to convey in my video, was letter of the law versus spirit of the law. The Israelites, they had the argument to exterminate the Canaanites. God told them to. They had the argument right there. And the Israelites could have said to the Gibeonites, "Nope, nope, nope, God told us to destroy you. We have the argument. We have God on our side." But that's not what they did. They showed mercy because there is the spirit of the law. My point in my video was spirit of the law versus letter of the law. The Israelis today say we are fighting terrorism. And so these Gazan terrorists butchered our people. And that's true, right? I'm not sitting here denying that. That is true. And so in the mind of the in the argument of the Zionists, or in the argument of the Israelis, they have a right to indiscriminately kill people. And in their mind, they have a justification because, well, the society of Gaza favors Islamic terrorism. It favors pro-Palestine terrorism. And a huge portion, or let's just say the majority of the Gazans, support what happened on October the 7th. And so with that in mind, you have this justification to slaughter and to kill and to do massacres. And the same thing can be applied to the Palestinians in the West Bank. Well, the Palestinians in the West Bank, a lot of them support terrorism, a lot of them support Hamas, so we can just slaughter those people or kick them out of their homes, demolish their homes. We can cut down their olive trees, we can burn down their fruit trees, right? Because they have a culture of terrorism, so therefore we have a right to replace them. Now, perhaps on paper, you can make a very good argument to justify a policy of pushing the Palestinians out and replacing them. Perhaps you can make an argument where you sound very convincing, because and this is very scary. Evil can sound very convincing at times. But you see, you can, and this was my point, you can point to the letter of the law. You can point to an argument that sounds convincing. But there is the spirit of the law, which means there is room for mercy. And the thing that I have noticed about a lot of these far-right Zionists is that they have no mercy. They love to talk about nationalism. They love to talk about how much they hate the Palestinians, or they love to talk about how much the Palestinians are just filled with terrorism and terrorists and how they have a culture of terrorism. And they can point to facts, right? And let's just say, for the sake of the argument, that they're right about the Palestinians. And you can sit there and say, well, that means we have a right to push them out, or we have a right to replace them. Or if you want to take a very, very evil and sinister route, you could say, well, we have a right to genocide them. Now, of course, I don't agree with this, but they can say that. And you may lay out an argument that sounds very, very justified. We have a right to push them out. We have a right to bomb them. We have a right to get rid of these people because they have a culture of terrorism. And you may lay out a convincing argument, but that's the letter of the law. That's a written argument. What I am trying to convey is the importance of the spirit of the law. You can sit there and talk about terrorists and how we have to get rid of terrorism, and you may be right, or you are right? You are correct. We have to get rid of terrorism. That's correct. But the problem is that you have people who use the presence of terrorism as a justification to do evil, and you have people who fixate so much on fighting terrorism that they lose sight of their humanity. And so they may follow the letter of the law and say things like, well, in the rules of war, we can do this, and we can bomb this many people, and we can kill civilians as long as we have this facade that that's not our goal. We can do these things. We can find loopholes. That's the letter of the law. The letter of the law allows room for loopholes. The letter of the law allows for pretexts to be used to justify evil and destruction. But I'm talking about the spirit of the law. Justice and mercy. Terrorists who commit murder should be given capital punishment. That's justice. But does that mean that you are justified to kill people who are completely innocent, who have nothing to do with what terrorists did? Does that mean that you can put snipers up on rooftops and just take out civilians for fun? That's what I'm talking about. Now, Mr. RG can make a response and say, well, I'm not talking about that, but that's what I'm talking about. Because in my video, the one that you replied to, I talked about how this historian, who was a very prominent Israeli historian, Benny Morris, said in an article published by Haaretz that a genocide of the Palestinians is inevitable. And that's what I was talking about. I was talking about this desire amongst certain Israelis, certainly not all, but certain Israelis who want to genocide Palestinians. This desire amongst certain Israelis to genocide Palestinians. That's what I was talking about. And what I said was that this violent, or this mass murderous desire is growing within Israeli society. And so if that mentality, if that murderous mentality just festers and continues to grow, what's going to come about from that? What's going to come about from that is a policy, or a desire to enact a policy of genocide. And so I said, remember how God treated Israel after King Saul committed a genocide on the Gibeonites. God was angry. That angered God. God hates genocide. And that was my point. Now, I was kind of surprised that somebody would have a problem with my point. My point was, genocide is wrong. God's against genocide. And let's look at this story in the second book of Samuel, in which it recounts how King Saul enacted a policy of genocide and God cursed Israel. And I said, let's take this lesson from the Bible very, very seriously, and let's focus on the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law. The letter of the law says this society has a culture that embraces terrorism, or has a culture that praises terrorism, And therefore, we have a right to just bomb them to oblivion, do massacres, kill civilians as much as we want. We can destroy their homes as much as we want because that culture of theirs is inferior to ours, and that culture is pro-terrorism. So therefore, we can now justify whatever evils we want to do. We can snipe people from rooftops. We can snipe civilians, even if they have a white flag. We can kill them. We can have competitions between ourselves over who can kill the most civilians. And yes, Israeli soldiers do this, have done this, and they were doing this in the Netzarim corridor during the most recent war between Israel and Hamas. And you can sit there and say, yeah, we're justified to do these things because that culture is barbaric. And you can convince a lot of people to accept such a mentality, to accept such a paradigm. But I would say that that is the letter of the law, right? You're following a code that you have collectively contrived. But that is completely vacuous of compassion, completely vacuous of mercy, and it is completely vacuous of justice. And the letter of the law consists of what? The spirit of the law consists of what? Justice and mercy. And look at that story from the second book of Samuel. The second book of Samuel. What does it say? It talks about how King Saul wanted to do a genocide on the Gibeonites and how God cursed Israel because of this. And you go back to the book of Joshua, in which the Gibeonites made their alliance with the Hebrews, made their pact with the Hebrews. And the Gibeonites go to Joshua and they say, have mercy on us, Joshua. Have mercy on us. We don't want to be exterminated. And Joshua has mercy on them. And then what happens? The other Canaanite tribes find out. They got wind about this pact between the Gibeonites and the Hebrews. And they said, let us come together and let us exterminate the Gibeonites. And then what happens? Joshua is told about this conspiracy to genocide the Gibeonites by the Canaanites. And Joshua doesn't say, well, let's allow the Canaanites to butcher each other. And the Gibeonites go to Joshua and they say, please, Joshua, defend us from these other Canaanites who want to exterminate us because of our pact with you. Help us, Joshua. And Joshua could have said, nope, God told me to exterminate every single one of you, so I'm just going to allow those Canaanites to exterminate you and allow them to do some of the work for us. And after they're done exterminating you, we're going to exterminate them. And they're just going to do some of the work for me, so I don't have to do as much work as I would have. He could have said that. And in light of the letter of the law, he would have appeared correct. He would have appeared just, or not just, he would have appeared right. And he could have just said, nope, I have the commandment from God himself. I don't need to protect you. But that's not what happened. That is not what happened. Joshua gathers his army and he says, let's go and protect these Canaanites. Even though we were commanded to exterminate them, we are going to defend them. That's the spirit of the law. And so fast forward to so in the time of Joshua, these Canaanite tribes tried to exterminate the Gibeonites, and God empowered the Hebrews to defend those Canaanites, the Gibeonites. And in fact, as the battle was going on, the sun began to descend, and Joshua said, sun, stand still. It's one of the most profound, one of the most epic parts of the whole Bible. Joshua says, sun, stand still. And he looks at the moon and he says, moon, stand still. And the Bible says that this was the most epic battle that Israel had ever fought. And that battle, the most epic battle that Israel had fought, was done not in the defense of fellow Hebrews, but in the defense of Canaanites who were commanded to be destroyed. And it's so profound. And what do we learn from this? That even if God tells you to exterminate another people, even if God tells one nation to exterminate another nation, there is still room for mercy. Now that is profound. And fast forward to the time of King Saul. King Saul tried to exterminate the Gibeonites. He tried to do exactly what the pagan Canaanites tried to do during the time of Joshua, which was to exterminate the Gibeonites. And so what happened? King Saul became the Canaanite. And so essentially, that's what God was saying. King Saul, you became the Canaanite. You became just like those Canaanites against whom Joshua fought to defend the Gibeonites. And so there is that spirit of the barbarian. And so these Israelis who say, well, we can kill these people and we can kill civilians, it doesn't matter, they're all terrorists. Who then becomes the barbarian? Who then becomes the terrorist? You become what you claim to be against when you begin to copy the ways of your enemy. Or when you become worse than your enemy, you become the barbarian, you become the terrorist. And there is a growing culture of violence in Israel. There is a growing culture that accepts settler violence against Palestinians. There is a region called the West Bank. The West Bank is one of the two Palestinian territories. There's Gaza and then there's the West Bank. And there's a lot of fighting going on in the West Bank right now, specifically in the area of Jenin. But there is this culture within Israel that has a two-tier legal system. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in the West Bank, you have these settlers. These are Jewish settlers who live in the Palestinian territory, and they have their own gated communities, and they have their own guards, and they essentially are just their own government. And they are not under the same rules that are applied to Palestinians. And so settlers can commit violence against Palestinians and actually get away with it. So there was an article that was published by the New York Times recently, and it talks about this two-tier legal system. The two-tier situation has only become worse during the past year. We scrutinized a sample of 36 cases from the West Bank since October the 7th that shows how much the legal system has decayed. In cases ranging from stealing livestock to arson to violent assault, not a single suspect was charged with a crime. Not a single suspect was charged with a crime. In one case, a settler shot a Palestinian in the stomach while an Israeli Defense Forces soldier looked on. Yet, the police questioned the shooter for only 20 minutes and never as a criminal suspect. Now, this quote that I'm about to read to you guys is quite telling. Look what it says here. Ami Ayalon, the head of Shin Bet in the late 1990s, told us that government leaders, quote, signal to the Shin Bet that if a Jew is killed, that's terrible. If an Arab is killed, that's not good, but it's not the end of the world. So there's no equal legal system here. So if a settler attacks a Palestinian or burns a Palestinian's house or kills a Palestinian's cattle or cuts down his olive groves, nothing happens. Nothing happens. And I can give you guys more examples. Look at the example of what happened to Samiz Zaitoun. Samiz Zaitoun, this is the most tragic story. Samiz Zaitoun was a Palestinian guy. He was an old Palestinian dude who converted to Judaism. Palestinian, imagine that, right? You never hear about that sort of thing. A Palestinian Muslim who converts to Judaism. He gets arrested by the Palestinian Authority. The PA, or whoever was in the prison, tried to coerce this guy to go back to Islam, to leave Judaism. He refuses. They tortured this man. He still refused to renounce Judaism and go back to Islam. He suffered for the state of Israel. He became a Zionist. One day he's at a bus stop and this Israeli soldier points a gun at him, and you can see it. It's on video. You can see it on the soldier's body cam footage, and you can also see it from the security camera that was nearby. It's very clear. This soldier points a gun at this guy. This guy's not doing anything wrong. He's not posing a threat to anyone, not posing a threat to the soldier involved. Soldier is pointing a gun at him. Soldier asks him, are you Arab or are you Jewish? He says, sorry, are you a Jew? What are you? He says, I'm Jewish, because he's a convert to Judaism. The Israeli soldier does not believe him. He says, put your hands up. His hands are clearly up. Now, I can't play this video on YouTube because it would be against TOS, but you can watch the video. It's quite easy to find. I'm pretty certain it's on Wikipedia because Wikipedia has an article on this story. His hands are clearly and obviously up. It's very, very conspicuous. The Israeli soldier executes this man in cold blood. It was cold-blooded murder. And what happens to the soldier who murders this man? Nothing. And do you know what the judge said to justify him not convicting this soldier? The judge said, well, Mr. Zaytoun had an Arab accent when he was speaking Hebrew. Now, Mr. Zaytoun, if you watch the video of him talking before he is killed, it's quite clear that this man can speak Hebrew fluently, but he had an Arab accent. And so that Arab accent justified the soldier executing this man in cold blood. And what happened to the soldier? Absolutely nothing. Is this justified? Now, here was a case of a Palestinian converting to the religion of Israel, right? Judaism, becoming a Zionist. But because he had an Arab accent, all of a sudden, a soldier was considered justified to not only see him with suspicion, but to murder him in cold blood. And nothing happened to the soldier, and the soldier really didn't give a damn. This is what I'm talking about. And so this mentality that says, well, this guy has an Arab accent, I'm looking at him with suspicion, I have a right to take away his life, this mentality and how it has seeped into the legal system of Israel, it's growing. This evil is growing. This darkness is growing. So this is the concern that I was expressing in my video. The very concern of one of Israel's most prominent historians, Benny Morris, in his article published by Haaretz, in which he says that a murderous mentality is festering and growing in Israel, and if it takes control, Israel will do a genocide. A genocide of the Palestinians will be inevitable. And I said this is wrong, and I pointed to the story in the second book of Samuel, in which King Saul said, I am right to do a genocide. King Saul felt right, and this was my point. King Saul felt righteous in his zeal for Israel. The Bible says in his zeal for Israel, he tried to exterminate the Gibeonites. And I would like to replace the word zeal with Zionism. In his Zionism, he tried to exterminate people. And God was angry. He was angered by that. And this is my whole point. And this is what I said in my video. I'm certain that Saul had all these arguments that sounded convincing. Well, God commanded us to exterminate them. Yes, Joshua did make a pact. And King Saul, I would not be surprised that King Saul made the argument that Joshua was wrong because God made the commandment to exterminate them. And Joshua made a pact with those Canaanites, and Joshua broke the rules. I'm certain that King Saul made that argument. And I could lay out that argument. I could sound very convincing. Well, God did command them to exterminate all the Canaanites, but Joshua did make a pact with one tribe of Canaanite called the Gibeonites, and he was breaking the rules. So King Saul simply said, I am going to finish off the job that God told us to do. I'm going to complete the job that God commanded us to do. And I'm certain that King Saul had a very convincing argument. That's the letter of the law. Just as when Israelis come along and they say, look, these Palestinians, they have a culture of terrorism, culture of jihad. We have to get rid of them. We can't live with these people. That justifies us killing them and ethnically cleansing them. And you have these Zionists who can make these arguments. Now, they're not convincing to me, but they can make arguments that are very convincing to too many damn people. And that's what's so scary. And so they will say, well, look at all the terrorism that comes, right? And they sound very convincing. And so therefore they will say, therefore we have a right to do this violence on them and get rid of them. That's the letter of the law. The spirit of the law says justice and mercy. If a terrorist does murder and murders people, that terrorist should be given capital punishment. That's justice. But if you have some Palestinian grandmother who's waving a white flag and she's with her grandson, and some Israeli sniper shoots her in the head in cold blood, that's not justice. That's not mercy. There's a word for that. It's called murder. There's another word for that. It's called evil. And that's what I'm talking about. My video was simply saying that is wrong. Just as after Saul did a genocide, God said, Saul, you're wrong. You're wrong. That's my whole point. Letter of the law versus spirit of the law. So let's go on with this guy's comment. This is going to be a long-ass video, guys. So RG goes on to say, the Arab villages that surrendered to Israel in 1948 were given mercy and allowed to stay for the most part, and they were granted citizenship. Okay, fair enough. And that's where most of the Israeli Arabs came from. They are descendants of these people. Yes, this is true. This is true. The Arab Israelis are the descendants of basically Arabs that never fled Israel. They never fled Palestine once the Israelis defeated the Arabs, the Jordanians, during it was during one of the wars they had in the past. I don't remember which one. It was either the 6 Days War or the 48 War. I don't remember. Anyway, they are the equivalent of the Gibeonites. Okay, so here is another thing. There is a growing sentiment in Israel, not just against Palestinians, but also against Arab Israelis. And I'm not saying that the majority of Israelis hate Arab Israelis, but there are Israeli Jews who do hate Israeli Arabs. And they will say, look, these Israeli Arabs, they have sympathy for terrorism, they have sympathy for Islamic Jihad or the Palestinian Intifada. And again, the very arguments that they apply to the Palestinians, they also apply to the Israeli Arabs. So what happens if that mentality dominates Israel? What's going to happen? What's going to happen is not just violence against the Palestinians, but also against the Arab Israelis. And that's another thing that I also warn about. And that's another thing that I'm also concerned about. So RG goes on to say, so if the point of your story is that Israelis should provide mercy like Joshua did with the Gibeonites, you kind of need the Palestinians to behave like the Gibeonites, don't you? Well, Sami Zaitoun was a Palestinian who was loyal to Israel. And hell, even converted to Judaism. But because he had an Arab accent, the Israeli soldier felt justified to murder him, even though his hands were up and he posed no threat to anyone. And the judge pardoned the soldier who committed the murder of Sami Zaitoun. And the judge argued, well, because Sami Zaitoun had that Arab accent when he spoke Hebrew, that deserves him being looked upon with suspicion, and it also gives an excuse to the soldier for what he did. And that mentality is the problem. The mentality of the soldier who shot him is the problem. And the problem is that mentality is growing. And if that mentality grows large enough and becomes popular enough, as Benny Morris warned in his article published by Haaretz, genocide is inevitable. That's the problem. That's what I'm saying. I wasn't arguing that the story of the Gibeonites is 100% exactly like the story of the Palestinians. That was never my point. My point was letter of the law versus spirit of the law. Where is mercy? And does the Palestinians having a culture that is insidious justify the Israelis to act insidious themselves? Does that justify the Israelis to commit acts of murder? That is the question that I pose to you. And the answer is obviously not. Obviously, it doesn't justify murder. And you know it. You, RG, and you, everyone else who disagrees with me, you guys know that I'm right. It doesn't justify murder of civilians. It doesn't justify an Israeli sniper sniping some grandmother who's holding a white flag. And that's another thing. The woman, you can see it on video. It's on video. You see an elderly Palestinian woman with her grandkid. She's holding a white flag. And boom, shot in the head. Shot in the head. Is there a Nuremberg trial type of situation going on to try these Israeli soldiers who did these sorts of crimes? No. And I'm 100% certain that there are too damn many Israelis who would see that video and think, that's totally fine. And you can read about what the IDF was doing in the Nitzarim corridor until recently. They were having competitions amongst themselves over who can kill the most civilians. Sniping civilians, killing them. And then if you read the article on Haaretz that talked about this whole very evil and very dark situation, the article talks about how these Israeli soldiers in one incident just killed 200 people. And then they went to the bodies and they said, well, out of all these 200 people, about 10 or so were actually confirmed to be members of Hamas or confirmed to be Hamas combatants. The rest of them were just civilians. The thing is that they are Israeli soldiers who know that this whole thing is atrocious. And those people are trying to get the word out that this is happening. They're trying to shed light on this darkness. And I have to commend those people. And there are a lot of people in Israel who are against this evil. And there are a lot of Jewish people, a lot of Jewish voices that are against this evil. The problem is that the Jews who are for this evil have the biggest freaking mouths. And the problem is that their mentality is spreading. So let's go back to your comment, Mr. RG. So you say here that the Palestinians need to behave like the Gibeonites, but they don't. And you go on to say they are still screaming Khaybar, Khaybar in the streets of Gaza and saying they want to slaughter the Jews. Yes, listen, my father was born and raised in the West Bank. My father was a part of that culture. And yet, regardless of that, my father eventually realized that he was wrong. Now, what do you learn from that? What you learn from that is that there is room for mercy and there is room really for justice at the same time. If you have terrorists who commit acts of murder, yes, those terrorists should be given the death penalty. That's what I believe. And Israel technically has the death penalty, but hasn't really enacted the death penalty since they killed that Nazi, Mr. Eichmann. But terrorists who commit murder or who rape should be executed. That's justice. But just because we have justice doesn't mean we shouldn't have mercy. There is room for mercy. There are Palestinians who have a culture of terrorism, just like my father was in that very culture of terrorism. But my father realized that he was wrong. So that also means that there are Palestinians who could one day open their eyes and realize, oh my God, we were wrong. There has to be room for mercy. Or else we're just going to kill people, or you're just going to kill people and continue on killing, and there's going to be no room for redemption. There's going to be no room for people to say, oh my God, I saw the light. I was wrong. I was wrong to say death to the Jews. Now, let's look at the other side. You have Jews who say death to Arabs. Kill the Arabs. And I was reading a story that happened some years ago in which there were these Zionists in some area of the West Bank, and they almost started a riot. And there were some IDF soldiers there. They tried to suppress the crowd and all that, but they were screaming death to Arabs. And they like to say things, and you can see this. This is. I don't have to show you a clip, or I don't have to show you a screenshot from an article to prove this. There are plenty of settlers who can be found screaming, a good Arab is a dead one. And they say death to Arabs, and they say, we're going to burn your villages. And they say, oh, there are no schools in Gaza because there are no children. Ha ha, we killed the kids. Now, again, I'm not saying this is all Jews. I'm not saying that all Israelis are this way. Obviously not. But they are Israeli fanatics who are this way, and they scream death to Arabs. Now, what should happen to them? Now, if your position is that the Palestinians who say death to Jews should be pushed out of the land, or they should not be respected in any way, what should happen to the Jews who say death to Arabs? Do the Palestinians have an insidious culture? Do they have insidious elements within their culture? Yes. But do the Jews also have elements that are insidious within their culture? That's my question. Because when you see Zionists screaming, or when you see settlers screaming death to Arabs, or a good Arab is a dead one, or we're going to burn your village, or there are no schools in Gaza because we killed the kids, when you see that sort of language, is that not also destructive and evil and vicious and vitriolic and malicious? Let's be real here. And that's the problem, is that no side wants to see what they do wrong. That is the source of the problem. You have Palestinians who don't want to recognize their own destructive elements within their society, but you have settlers and you have Zionists who refuse to see, or to at least acknowledge, the dark realities within their society. And that, right there, that's the root of the problem. Not wanting to see the darkness that lies within their own circles, within their own realm. It's that absence of accountability. So if you go to, and it's not just Zionist Jews who act this way. You have Zionist Christians who act this way. And I will say that the Zionist Christians are worse because they know better. They know better. They read the New Testament where Jesus says, justice and mercy. You guys follow the letter of the law, but I tell you, you guys don't follow the spirit of the law, which is justice and mercy. And evangelicals love talking about compassion and grace, and we're saved by grace and the love of God and the mercy of God. But when they see Israel committing war crimes, whoop, don't care. Nope, all that justice and mercy and compassion and the love of Jesus, all that goes right out the window. And if someone goes to these evangelicals and says, look at the war crimes, and I've done this, I've done it. I went to some people that I know, and I told them about the war crimes, and I gave them the article by Haaretz that talks about the war crimes that were done in the Netstream corridor. And most of them just didn't give a shit. Most of them were saying, you know, one of them told me, one of them said, they're God's people. You know, they're God's people. And I say, the people who commit those war crimes are not God's people. Those are Satan's people. Let's go back to your comment here. So you say here that the Palestinians are celebrating Hamas. They have learned nothing. So what is Israel supposed to do? Well, what is Israel supposed to do? That's my question. Because your comment, right? Let's just look at the context here. Your comment is a response to my video. And my video was about the statement, or really, I should say, about the warning that came from Benny Morris. Benny Morris, one of Israel's most prominent historians. And Benny Morris said that the genocide of the Palestinians is inevitable because a mentality that prizes murder, or a racist mentality that prizes genocide, is growing. That insidious and violent and bloodthirsty ideology is growing. And so a genocide of the Palestinians is inevitable. And I said, damn, that's wrong, right? This is wrong. Genocide is wrong. That was my whole point. Genocide's wrong, guys. I'm surprised that anyone would have a problem with what I was saying. Genocide is wrong. You know, if you want to arrest terrorists who have committed murder and put them through capital punishment, you have every right as a nation, right? Israel has every right to do that. Any government, any country has a right to do that. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about war crimes. I'm talking about genocide. Now, if you want to say, whoa, terrorism, ooh, terrorism, and that justifies genocide? Is that your point? I'm asking you, is that your point? Now, if you want to use that argument, oh, well, you should love Turkey. Listen, all the Israelis, I got to drink some coffee here, guys. All the Israeli Zionist fanatics who believe that they have a right to do genocide or ethnic cleansing, they should be hugging Turkey. I could use a more vulgar statement, but this is a family show. They should be hugging Turkey. They should be brown-nosed. They should just be brown-nosing the hell out of Turkey. Because that's Turkey's argument for the Armenian genocide. That was the Ottoman argument to justify the Armenian genocide. And believe it or not, I'm actually planning on doing a follow-up. I'm actually planning on doing a video on this topic because there was a Turkish guy who put a comment on one of my prior videos saying that there was no Armenian genocide. There was simply Armenian terrorists who declared war on the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire simply defeated the Armenians. There was no genocide. So I'm actually planning on doing a video as a response to that guy because, and this is the point that I want to convey in my future video and in this video, all genocide is done under a pretext. All genocide is done under the pretext of what? Fighting a war. If you look at any genocide in history, it was always done under what? This justification of, we are in war. We're in war. When Azerbaijan was, and Azerbaijan, by the way, is one of Israel's biggest allies. When Azerbaijan was doing war crimes in Nagorno-Karabakh in 2020, and they were beheading people and doing mass executions, and they were murdering civilians, nothing happened. There was no war crimes tribunal. Oh, and that was Turkey's and Azerbaijan's doing. And what was Azerbaijan's excuse? We are in war. War. Oh, so that means you can behead elderly people? Because that's what Azeri soldiers were doing. You can behead people. You can execute people. You can execute civilians. Is that what you're telling me? When the Germans genocided the Nama and the Herero people in Namibia, they also genocided those people under the argument that they were at war. Because some of these Namibians wanted to be liberated from German occupation, and so they did acts of terrorism or they did some sort of attacks. I don't exactly remember. But the Germans said, okay, we're at war. So what did they do? They did a genocide. Soviet Union was a big threat to everybody, was it not? Or not to everybody, but to some people, right? It was a threat to Europe. The Soviet Union wanted to spread communism into the rest of Europe. And communism involves what? Killing a lot of people. Communism is very destructive, murderous. It reduces people to poverty. It has gulags. And the Soviet Union killed how many tens of millions of people, right? I mean, let's not sit here and say the Soviet Union was great. And the Germans said, look, Soviet Union invaded Finland. They control Romania. We gotta fight these people. And the Germans did a war against the Soviet Union. And they declared war on Bolshevikism. They declared war on communism. But in the midst of that war, what did they do? A genocide. And who did they genocide? The Jews, the Poles, the Russians. And in that war, they besieged the city of Leningrad. You can look into this. One of the greatest crimes ever done in World War II. The siege of Leningrad. And during that siege, well, the Germans, they said, oh, we're going to bomb the city of Leningrad, right? It's an enemy city, and we have to defeat it. So the Germans besieged the city. They cut the city off from food, and they, for hundreds and hundreds of days, they bombed Leningrad, bombed it to oblivion, bombed it, starved it, and it was all done under the name of war. It's like that song by Rage Against the Machine, killing in the name of. They were killing in the name of war. We're at war. Against what? An evil culture, an evil ideology, the ideology of communism. And did not communism kill tens of millions? So on paper, and this is what I mean by letter of the law, on paper, the Germans had very convincing arguments. Now, they're not convincing to me, but they were convincing to enough people. They're fighting communism. Communism is dangerous. Communism puts people in gulags. Communism kills Christians, right? They had a very convincing argument. The Soviets have a very destructive culture. Communism, Bolshevikism, Leninism, Marxism. Oh, Aren't all these conservatives today complaining and expressing all this terror and consternation about cultural Marxism, wokeism, right? That's why a lot of people are starting to love Hitler, because Hitler was against Marxism, and so they think, oh, well, look, Hitler is our guy because we hate wokeism and cultural Marxism. And so they cut the city off from food. They bombed this city. And they killed they killed about 1 million people. They killed 1 million people. I don't know the exact number, but they killed 1 million people. And during the trials of the Nazis after World War II, there was a major Nazi leader. His name was Zalewski, Mr. Zalewski. And Erich von dem Zalewski stated during his trial that their goal, the Nazis' goal, was to butcher tens of millions of Slavic people. They wanted to kill as many Slavs as possible, as many Jews. They wanted to exterminate the Jews. They wanted to exterminate as many Slavs as they could and enslave the rest of them. And Zalewski said that every killing of every Slav done by the Third Reich, and he said this, be it by bombing, starvation, shooting, it didn't matter. Every killing of every Slav was deliberate and intentional. That was their intention. Now, they could have made the argument, well, this was during the trial, but during the war, they could have made the argument and said, well, we cut the city off from food, and yes, we're bombing the city, but we are at war against communism. Do you want communists in your neighborhood? Do you want this red terror in your country, and they're going to put your ass in a gulag? Now, fast forward to today. Israel, what? Cut Gaza off from food, bombed Gaza, besieged Gaza for over a year. And what was their argument? Literally, this was Israel's argument, one of Israel's arguments. They said, if we don't stop them now, then Sharia law is going to be in your country. Oh, that sounds very convincing. I mean, Sharia law. Do you want to be in a burqa? Do you want to drink camel piss? Do you want to worship an asteroid? I don't. Do you see how people are treated in Sharia law? Oh, man, that makes perfect sense. But then you read about the war crimes. And then you read about settler violence in the West Bank. You read about these things. And what do you do with them? That's the thing. What do you do with that reality? Do you say, well, they're justified? Well, let's rewind back to the Nazi reign of terror, to the Nazi war against the Soviet Union. And you see what the Nazis were doing in the Soviet Union. You could say, well, man, there's gulags and there's the Holodomor, and people were starved to death by the communists under the Soviet government. And do I want that? No. But so are the Germans right? Well, maybe the Germans are right. I mean, they're fighting against communism. Do we want that in our neighborhood? Do we want communism in our neighborhood? But then you read about the death camps. You read about the deliberate slaughter of civilians. You read about the extermination of Jewish people, Polish people, Russians. You read about the pogroms that were sanctioned by the Nazis, that were given a pass by the Nazis, embraced and encouraged by the Nazis. And then you say, well, do I want that? And the question is, what do you do with that? Do you say, well, the Nazis were justified because they were fighting communism? Is that the kind of route we're going to go? Because once we say that the Zionists are justified in ethnically cleansing people, killing civilians, once we make those arguments, then everything we have fought for, all of our principles, are for nothing. And the devil has won. Because at the end of the day, that is what Satan wants. That's what the devil wants. For us to kill each other, for us to justify murder, for us to justify genocide. And in such a case, in such a situation, the demons have won. Let's go back to your comment, Mr. RG. So you say here, I'm all for Israel providing Palestinians, especially Christians, with mercy and even citizenship, if they truly want to be a part of the country the Jews have built and be Israeli. Okay. Now, I understand your point, but what if they don't want to be Israeli? Well, then we kill them, or we push them out. Well, you push them out, right? So pushing them out would entail mass deportations. Mass deportations, okay. What if they don't want to be deported? What if they resist? What's the next step? What's the next step? You kill them? Because, you know, as we can learn from history, mass deportations have many times been the precursor to genocide. The Ottomans, now here's an interesting parallel here. The Ottomans went to the Armenians and they said, Ottomanize. The Armenians didn't speak Turkish. The Armenians refused to Ottomanize. In fact, they so much so refused to Ottomanize that they would many times join the Russians during World War I. So the Ottoman Empire looked at the Armenians and they said, okay, you refuse to Ottomanize. Not only do you refuse to Ottomanize, now you are working with our arch enemy, the Russians. And so what did the Ottomans do? They began to deport the Armenians. The Armenian genocide did not begin with genocide. The Armenian genocide began with mass deportations. And they brought the Armenians into the Deir ar-Zur, or the Syrian desert. In fact, I believe it was the Ottomans, and in fact, I'm pretty certain this is the truth. I believe it was the Ottomans who first used a railway system to genocide people. They used the railway system to transport large portions of people, large groups of people, and they systematically did a genocide, but they began with deportations. They were deporting the Armenians, deporting them, and then what happened? They would force them to do death marches. Do the death march. And then as they would walk miles and miles and miles, they would grow tired, exhausted, starving, and then they began to die. And many times, Ottoman soldiers or Kurdish fighters who were allies with the Ottomans would slaughter Armenians. And then they would take, so they, like I said, they used the railway system. They would use also the train stations as death camps. They transformed the railway system or the train stations into death camps. So they would bring these Armenians into these train stations and they would cram them in together. Cram them in. So people were starving, they were sick, and it was just absolutely miserable. And people would die in these conditions. And this was so horrendous. And this went on for so long that 1 million Armenians died. Now, the Turks would say, well, no, we were at war with the Russians. A lot of Armenians sided with the Russians, and the Russians were our enemies. And also they were Armenian terrorists, and that's true. They were, if you look into it. And there was a case where Armenian terrorists took over a bank somewhere in Anatolia, and there were cases of Armenian terrorists murdering civilians. And so the Ottomans said, we have to get rid of this problem. And they refused to Ottomanize. They're refusing to become Ottoman. And so we're going to deport them. And, well, we're not going to, there's no official order. And this is what Turkish nationalists argue today, by the way. They say there is no official order from the Ottoman Empire to commit genocide. There was simply deportations because the Ottomans were in the middle of a war with the Russians, and a lot of the Armenians were pro-Russia, so they were considered a dangerous and subversive element within the Ottoman Empire, so therefore they needed to be deported. But in the midst of those deportations, there was a genocide. And so you have people today saying the Palestinians should be Israelized. Well, what if they don't want to be Israelized? And the thing is that they are Jewish people in Israel. They are fanatics, right? I want to make it clear that I'm not saying this is all Jews, but they are fanatics indeed who are in Israel, who are so fanatic that they would not even accept the idea of Arabs being Israelized. Look at the story of Sama Saitoun. He was a Palestinian who got Judaized. He converted to Judaism, and he was still murdered. And the murderer got away with it because of racism. So when they talk about mass deportations, right? If they start saying, well, we're going to do mass deportations of Palestinians, we're not going to kill them. We're just going to deport them. Oh, yes, yes, yes. And the Germans said, oh, we're going to deport Jews to Poland. Well, no, there's no official order to kill them, but we're just going to deport them to work camps in Poland. We're just going to deport them. And a genocide happened. Oh, we're not going to genocide the Armenians. There's no official order to genocide the Armenians. We're just going to deport them. Right. If we are to learn from history, and the sad reality is that people, for the most part, refuse to learn from history, but if we are indeed going to learn from history, then we should not be looking at such an idea with enthusiasm. So you go on to say, if that's the case, then yes, I believe Israel has a moral obligation to provide mercy to those people. All right. So your point, your position is that Israel should only show mercy to Palestinians who want to be Israelized. But what about the Palestinian grandmother who's holding her grandkid and she's holding a flag, a white flag, and a sniper shoots her in the head? Or what about the story of Iyad al-Halak, who was a Palestinian man in his 30s who was mentally handicapped, and he would go to a special needs school for adults in East Jerusalem, and his teacher, who was a special needs teacher, would escort him to the school every morning, and she was escorting him to the school, as was usual, like clockwork, and an Israeli soldier said, hey, are you going to pull a gun on me? Because he had a phone in his pocket. He was taking his phone out, and the soldier said, hey, are you going to put a gun on me? And he pointed his weapon at Iyad al-Halak, and Iyad al-Halak ran away, and they chased after him, and they cornered him, and the special needs teacher said, he's a student of mine, don't kill him. And a soldier killed Iyad al-Halak. And then what did the soldier say to get away with it? He said, well, there was a screaming woman, and I thought he was going to murder the screaming woman. That screaming woman was Iyad al-Halak's teacher, and she was begging them not to kill him. And the soldier said, well, I saw a screaming woman, and I thought that Iyad was going to kill her. That was a blatant lie. That was the teacher saying, don't kill him, he's my student. And that soldier who committed murder got away with it. And guess what happened after the murder? Iyad al-Halak's mother confronted the Israeli nationalist politician, Mr. Ben-Gvir, Itamar Ben-Gvir. And she confronted him. And you know what Itamar Ben-Gvir told her, the mother of this young man who was murdered? He said, you are a terrorist. That's what he told her. The mother of a young man who was murdered, or who you could at least say was unjustly killed, is called a terrorist. And that is really the foundational ideology of this growing and festering cancerous ideology within Israel. And that is, they're all terrorists. They're all terrorists. And when they kill civilians in Gaza, they say they're all terrorists. And there was an Israeli official who said there are no innocents in Gaza. They're all terrorists. All of them. Even Iyad al-Halak is a terrorist. His mother is a terrorist. And Semeh Zaitoun, who was killed at a bus stop, he should also be seen as a terrorist. Well, he had an Arab accent. Isn't that what the judge said? So having an Arab accent, terrorist. You see the problem here? Now, you could say, well, there is a culture of terrorism in the West Bank or in Gaza. And I would say, yeah, you're right. Well, we can't live with this culture. We have to get rid of this culture. What are you going to do? Now, you can lay out this argument and say that these people are filled with terrorists. And so we have to do something. That's the letter of the law. But again, you have people who focus so much on the letter of the law that they lose sight of their own humanity, and they lose sight of justice and mercy. And justice and mercy are the two arms of the spirit of the law, and that entails mercy. To go out and slaughter civilians in cold blood is not just. And you can make all the arguments you want, and this is another point that I want to drive home here, and that is, and this is a very scary reality, and it almost pains me to say this, and it's kind of difficult for me to say this. But people who orchestrate genocides make very convincing arguments for genocide. Why is that? Because they will always provide pretexts to justify the genocide. And if you do not understand that all genocide is justified by pretexts, then you will fall for the pretexts. People will sit there and say Hitler was a madman, And then they will go out and follow some cult of personality that wants to orchestrate a genocide. And if someone goes to the followers of that cult of personality and says, this cult of personality is basically Hitlerian, it's just like the Third Reich, or it has parallels with Nazism, then the followers of that cult of personality will say, no, 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 I am not following a Hitler. I am not following an ideology that is paralleled or akin to Nazism, because Hitler was a madman. My leader is practical and rational and logical, and he is pointing to real problems, and he is prescribing real solutions to those problems. But what these people don't understand is that they are following the pretexts for a genocide, and they are following the very pretexts that people fell for when they fell for Adolf Hitler and the Nazis, and that's the danger. And you have people who are not necessarily evil or malicious, but they get led astray to follow demonic and destructive and murderous ideologies and political parties. And that's why, not everyone who joined the Wehrmacht were genocidal. A lot of people who fought for Germany during World War II thought that they were fighting a good cause. They were fighting the spread of communism. They were fighting to stop the spread of communism. And you have people in the IDF who are not evil people. They're not genocidal people. They really believe, no, we're here to fight terrorism. And on paper, they're right. Just like the Germans fighting communism were on paper correct. They were correct in this, on paper. They were correct to fight communism. But there was evil at hand. And there was evil that was underlying everything. That was underneath it all. Just like there is evil underneath Israel's aspirations in Gaza. We're fighting terrorism and we need to fight terrorism. You're correct. You should fight terrorism. You're correct. You should fight communism. You should not want communism in your neighborhood. You should not want terrorism in your neighborhood. But does that justify mass murder? Does that justify genocide? Just like King Saul said, I have zeal for Israel, and God commanded us to get rid of all the Canaanites. Why are those Canaanites there? That argument sounded very convincing to too many people. But what did God say? Mercy. Mercy. Joshua made a pact with those people, and that was a pact of mercy, and you are to honor it. That's the spirit of the law. Let's go back to your comment here. Man, this is a long... How long have I been talking here? 1 hour. I don't care. If you don't like long videos, guys, you can go watch some TikTok shit. Go watch a TikTok video of some guy telling you about what women want. Anyway, let's see here. You say here, but the majority of the Palestinians want to destroy Israel, and if Israel gave them mercy, they would only see that as a sign of weakness. Okay. They are settlers who want to get rid of all the Palestinians, and they say death to Arabs. And so what if that ideology dominates Israel? Would, let's say, another country have a right to get rid of that culture in the name of getting rid of a murderous society? And you believe it or not, you have settlers who will attack Arabs. Yeah, they'll go out. Last year, there was a whole pogrom that happened in which settlers raided 11 Palestinian villages last year. I want to say it was in the spring or summer of last year, but they raided 11 Palestinian villages. And back in 2021, there was a town called Huwara, and settlers or fanatics raided Huwara. They sacked that town. And you had Zionists who were praising the sacking of Huwara. And these settlers, they say death to Arabs. There's no children left in Gaza. We killed the kids. We love it. They gloat in their murderousness. And so what should the Palestinians do in the face of those people? Should they put their arms down? Should they not defend themselves? Should they just sit there and take it? See, this is the problem. And this is the thing about the whole Israel versus Palestine thing, is that both sides have good arguments. And both sides are right to a certain extent, but both sides are also wrong. The Israelis are right when they say the Palestinians have a culture of terrorism. That's true. They have a culture of terrorism, and it's very destructive and insidious. That is true. The Palestinians are right when they say, listen, you have these violent settlers. That's also true. But you have Palestinians who come out and say, we have a right to kill people because those people shouldn't be here. That's wrong. Palestinians going out and killing settler children, that is wrong. And likewise, settlers going out and killing Palestinians and raiding their villages, that is wrong. Why can't we just be that simple? Things are really that simple, guys. So let's go back to your comment. You say, so perhaps Trump's plan to move them is the best option for them. I've thought that for a while now. Again, mass deportations. And what happens when they don't want to be deported? What happens if they resist deportation? What do you do with them? Israel should offer citizenship to any Palestinians who want to renounce being Palestinian and become Israeli. That could happen. I mean, I could see that happening. The issue is that most Palestinians don't want to be Israelized. Secondly, you have a lot of hardcore Zionists in Israel who are completely against such an idea because they want to make Israel they want to keep Israel as a Jewish state. And then if you have millions of Palestinians agreeing to be Israelized, that would mean millions more Arab Israelis, and then they would outpopulate the Jews. The Jews would never accept, the hardcore nationalist Jewish Israelis, they would never accept this idea. Again, if Palestinians come out and say, hey, yeah, we'll take the citizenship, I have no issue with that. My issue is against genocide. It's quite simple. Then Israel should annex the West Bank and Gaza, and that should be the end of it. But here's the thing is, you have Palestinians who are extremely stubborn, and they're not going to want to leave their homes. So what are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with them? And that's the thing. Like the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire wanted to deport the Armenians, and they tried to pressure the Armenians to be Ottomanized, and the Armenians said, we don't want to be Ottomanized. We don't want to speak Turkish. We don't want to be a part of your Ottoman culture. We're Armenians. And the Ottomans said, okay, we're going to genocide you. And the problem is, and I'm not saying you're this way, but the problem is there are too many people in Israel who do agree with genocide, and they wouldn't mind doing it in such a situation. And this is the danger that I'm warning about. This is the evil that I'm warning about. I'm simply echoing the warning that was declared by Benny Morris. And Benny Morris said a genocide of the Palestinians is inevitable because of this murderous ideology amongst fanatics that is growing. And then your last sentence here is, even the Arab countries are sick of the Palestinians, and I think eventually they will agree with Trump's plan. So I don't know what's going to happen with Trump's plan. That's not what I'm here to talk about. But this is a very common argument, and that is that everyone hates the Palestinians, right? This is a very common argument that Zionists love to use. Nobody wants the Palestinians. Arab countries don't want them. Blah, blah, blah. And so the fact that nobody wants them indicates that the Palestinians are actually really bad people. Here is the problem with your argument, my friend. So your argument is the fact that nobody wants to take in the Palestinians indicates that the Palestinians are bad. At one point in time, nobody wanted the Jews. During World War II, the Americans didn't want them. Most of the world did not want the Jews. Europeans didn't want Jews. Romanians didn't want Jews. Austrians didn't want Jews. Germans, yeah, that's an understatement. They definitely didn't want Jews. Does that indicate that the Jews were bad? So countries not wanting a people or not liking a people, or to use your term, being sick of a people, if that means that that people is bad, then countries not wanting the Jews, collectively not wanting the Jews, does that also mean that the Jews were bad? America didn't want them. They put a whole bunch of Jewish people on a ship, and they tried to get the ship to America to save the Jews from the death camps, and a whole bunch of Americans said, we don't want Jews in our country. So the Americans didn't want them, and they sent those Jews back to their deaths. That's the tragedy. The Americans didn't want them. The Germans didn't want them. Austrians didn't want them. Romanians didn't want them. All these countries collectively didn't want Jews. Does that mean that the Jews were bad? See the problem with this argument? I can turn it around against you. And that's your comment. So I responded to your comment. I appreciate the fact that you took the time to write a long comment, and you obviously thought about the comment, and that's why it's so long. And yeah, I decided instead of just writing a short reply to you, that I would do a full-length video. And here I am. I have talked for an hour and 20 minutes already. So here we go. There we go. So yeah, that's my response to you, Mr. RG. And I'm going to start doing more of these types of videos where I reply to your comments because it's fun. It's fun and it's educational, and it allows me to interact with you guys in a different way. And I think in a deeper way, too, because I think a video response is more interesting than a written response. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.